Welcome to everybody to an amazing session on mobile development. As we know, 40% of the global startup companies are building mobiles in first 2 years of their life. And the continued growth in the mobile cloud native applications and the workload migration from traditional data centers to cloud architectures continue to fuel application developments on mobiles. The need for organization is to monitor modern applications running in hybrid multi-cloud environments that generate large volumes of data are not instrumented by the traditional methods. This is referenced by observability, which is becoming more and more mainstream. Gartner predicts that multi experience mobile applications are projected to be the future. And there is a huge demand that is growing across multiple platforms, multiple industries across the globe to discuss the importance of mobile applications. And previously, the mobile applications used to be you have a native application and then you have a mobile version of it. Now, with the usage of smartphones, smart devices, and wearable devices, the demand has changed tremendously. And I have today an industry expert, Gregory Charles, with whom I worked a couple of years ago with Delta, had an amazing experience. He comes from intersection of liberal arts and technology, but he's an amazing proven digital leader who has experience in building mobile applications for different groups. And I have seen him in action at Delta, and now I'm seeing him in action in other agencies as well. He has built traditional mobile applications, many innovation applications, and I have seen the applications and used his products where he has incorporated critical program needs like concerning about various different constraints that we have in mobile application development, the reliability, security, memory, UI, UX experience, and whatnot. He has expertise to drive the critical programs across ideation, usability, capacity, reliability, and performance, efficiency, security, and marketability. He's experienced in managing many technical professionals and teams and innovation board experience, and he's versatile in many aspects. And he has done a lot of courses. He keeps himself abreast of the technology and also continuously educates himself with the latest things that's coming up in the market in his domain. That's where he ended up doing a lot of courses in MIT. In fact, he suggested some courses for me, and I attended taking those courses, then definitely got immensely benefited in how I understand certain things. So today I have a very eminent speaker from industry, Gregory. I'm very happy to have you with us. Thank you, Gregory.
Yeah, thank you for this wonderful welcome. It's been a long time since we connected, and
yeah,
I'm very interested to hear about the kind of knowledge you'd like to hear from me. I've certainly been in the industry for quite some time. As a matter of fact, I started out in the business as an entrepreneur myself. Way back then, when the iPhone first came out, I thought it was such a cool device. I wanted to develop mobile apps for myself. So I created my own company and started developing on the iPhone since 2008, actually. So since then, I've been slowly picking up, the skill set. I've worked for various size of organizations, from small size to bigger size to Fortune 500. And now I'm actually working for a Fortune 100 company. So Delta was one of them, and certainly now I'm at a different company these past years. And my experience has grown a lot into that space. But what hasn't changed is the need for mobile. I think there's a lot of misconception in terms of what mobile development is, and I'm here to answer all your questions to see, to really kind of share the knowledge and what's different between a web development versus a mobile development and all the other platforms that are out there.
Thank you. And you know, when I was thinking about this particular topic, I had two things in mind.
Sure.
One, the growing demand for the mobile application, and as you rightly said, the misconceptions about the mobile development. Native web app is not same as mobile development. That's one. The second thing is, a lot of people really fail to understand the concepts of monetization and monitoring and maintenance.
Right.
That's from the technical aspects of it. And why you for this particular topic? I know you have done hands-on development and you have seen a complete life cycle of the application, you know, right from ideation, because you being the entrepreneur, you know, at the early days, and then and from there you led large teams, not just at Delta, and also in your current assignment as a director of and you have several tribes and several teams. I know for sure that.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
there are so many aspects that we could really talk about and clear the misconceptions, and also reiterate the challenges and how you overcome them in your assignments. So
Sure.
one thing, let's start with how you know, you've been here almost 20 years in the similar 20 plus, I believe, in the similar domain. And when you started into the mobile development, there was not a separated domain as such that there is a mobile development. And you have seen a lot of trends, you know, initial days, today, and during the pandemic, and also things have changed drastically. So can you share the trends that you are seeing in the past now, and how do you see the trends going forward?
So, if anything, I see the trend going more and more toward native development. And I think that's one of the biggest misconception that there is out there is that if you build a website, you don't need to build a native mobile app. That is actually absolutely incorrect. From my experience, at least from what I've seen, I can tell you, I've kind of developed a little niche of expertise into that space to where I can come in and turn a mobile app or website into a native development. And I did the same thing at Southwest Airlines, and I did the same thing, you know, at Delta Airlines. And I'm doing it currently right now in my current role. So, and the reason that misconception is because they think that, you know, in order to save costs, they can just invest all their funds, all their budget into building the website, because that's the primary driver of accessing the internet, right? If you have a web portal, you can basically access everything that you need. Well, guess what? I think with the introduction of the smartphones, whether it's an iPhones or an Android phones or Google or Android phones, whatever you're using, the landscape is completely different from a browser that you're using on your desktop. Whether it's your desktop or even laptop, the landscape is much, much smaller. So what's happened is that the user experience have changed a lot since the beginning, to where they just was they started out basically in where if you try to load a web page on your phone, you're basically having to scroll, and then to get to the button at the bottom of the page, which was terrible. So it really created a really terrible user experience. And that's where the idea of having to, creating a more native experience to really apply to the landscape, to apply to the device that you're using. So what started happening is that we found that, okay, instead of the landscape is much bigger on the website. There's no questioning about that. But on the device, on the mobile device, even on a tablet too, the landscape is completely smaller. So what we found is that we need to really be more concrete in terms of what information we provide to the user. So by concrete, all the need for scrolling, you've taken that away. So what we decided to do then is by trying to find out exactly what are the users in need for during their mobile moment. By mobile moment is whether they, walking in the park or working at work, or they're working on the way to the airport, that's the mobile moment, to where the user is looking for specific information. So they don't need to scroll or to hit multiple pages to get to the information that they need. So that's when, by doing your user research to find out exactly what information the users are really in need for, and then provide that more toward the front, the home, the landing page, rather than having to, scroll or to tap to multiple next pages to get to the information. So it's that concrete information that the users are looking for during their mobile moment that we found that is very useful. So, and by addressing that, what you found is that the user experience is completely different, and really those user satisfaction also related to that goes way up because of that. So where users were much more frustrated on trying to access a website on their mobile phone, they found that by using a native app, the experience is much more enjoyable. It's just more definitely less frustrating, but certainly they get the information a lot quicker. So they really change that aspect of it. So your user's experience is a lot higher than it was before. So for companies like Southwest Airlines or Delta Airlines, or even Facebook, actually. Facebook, I don't know if you know this, but the first iteration of Facebook was actually a website. And they tried to encapsulate it into a native wrapper, but it was still a website that was encapsulated a native wrapper. So in essence, they tried to kind of fake it a little bit to where it looks like it was a native experience, but it wasn't. It was still a website within a native wrapper. So the user was not very enjoyable at all. So what they decided to do was to move away from that, and they decided to incorporate more native experience inside the Facebook itself. So that certainly kind of changed the whole experience around that. There are still some components of websites, what you call websites within Facebook that that is still present, but it is much, much less so than it was before. And so it's the same true for Delta Airlines. There's still some web websites or web pages within their native app, but it is definitely in the minority versus to what it was before, which was the majority was web pages, and then no native experience at all. So that's the trend, and that's going to continue to drive that, right? And then now with the need for, when users are starting to enjoy that information, they certainly want more, right? So what they're trying to do, okay, they want, Face ID, so that way they can log in using their face or their thumb, whatever you have on your phones. They want to basically kind of be able to copy and paste that information from one to the other. They want to basically kind of launch Google Maps to take them to a specific location where they need to go based on where they started out. Or they want to basically do a payment, a mobile payment within the app that they send. So all of that information is being added at a very, very rapid pace. And then that's really what's going to continue to drive that information. And then with more data to what we're saying is that they want to see the result of that. So Instagram and Facebook is one of the prime examples, right? Or even LinkedIn for that matter. You want to see how many users are accessing your profile on a daily basis. If you just posted an update on your profile, you want to see how many users are accessing it, have access to it. And you want to see exactly where they're coming from. Is it coming from Europe? Is it coming from Southeast Asia? Or is it coming from North America? So all of that information is driving a lot more data-driven intelligence into the native app, right? So we need to really kind of ingest that information and then present it in a very nice, logical and consumable fashion into the native apps. So that's where the market is right now, and that's what's going to continue to drive the market over the next few years.
Awesome. You actually brought up a very interesting point of taking the insights and actionable insights. And that's becoming right very, very critical, regardless of which application we take. It doesn't need to be just the social media related applications. Even like, I remember we used to talk about the RFID baggage scans,
Yeah,
and where the missing, and when you have the baggage app on the phone, then we were also talking about that. And also when we have the wearable devices, like having the smart watches and scanning, and then
right.
how we can. I remember having those conversations as part of the innovation. Thanks for refreshing all the memory.
Yeah,
um,
and you just reminded me, that's another new interface
yeah,
that is coming up, which is the smartwatches, right? So
correct.
all of that is gonna change also. And then of course now with augmented reality, which is what Facebook is really driving towards you. And fairly soon, I'm pretty sure Google is gonna come out with their own version of augmented reality, and so is Apple. So that's gonna change also the whole format, the whole concept of native, right? So all of that is going to need to be redesigned, and all of those are really considered to some extent mobile devices, right? Because those are things that you can use on the go, and you not necessarily have to be tied down to a desk or to a specific location. You can use it in all that. So mobile development certainly extend into smartphones, IoT devices, and very soon it's going to extend into augmented reality devices as well. The Google glasses and whatever glasses, virtual reality glasses as well.
Yeah, you actually stole my next question. My question is like, mobile application is not really related to the mobile app, the smartphones. It got like a lot bigger extension as AI and augmented realities, and as you mentioned about IoT. How do you, let's say you have an application, it's a mobile native app. Not necessarily like, let's say the first generation is you have a native app and you're converting that into a mobile app. That's step one. So let's say the company of maturity level 2, which has like a native mobile apps, like any cargo apps or any apps like T-Mobile or any apps. And then now with AI and AR coming into the picture, so how these applications can scale up to meet the next generation demands of the mobile
Right.
development.
So very good question, and that's one of the things. It's as I go in my experience, I've noticed more and more. So native, when you're building your mobile apps, you're not just looking at the mobile developers. It's actually an ecosystem of multiple
Mm.
um, um, engineers that's part of the process, right? And by that, I mean that if you look at the landscape for smartphone, it started out with a smartphone, right? So the smartphones, we had the iPhones, and we had the Google phones or the Android phones, right? And then what's ended up happening is that we have multiple form factors, which included, a 13-inch versus a 16-inch, or the iPhone 11, iPhone 14. So whatever you want to consider that, all of them are different sizes. And then with the introduction of the tablet, they also have different sizes that you have to consider as well. You have the iPad mini versus the iPad Pros or the iPad, I mean, you name it, there's different sizes, right?
Mhm.
So throughout each process, we realized that we couldn't put the burden on the developers to kind of come up in terms of what was the best user experience for each form factor. We needed to really work with experts in that field to help us understand what was the best user experience. And by that, I'm talking about the user research, the UI, the user experience. I think they have a specific name, but the designers, right? The UI or UX designers,
UX designers.
they're the one that have the expertise in terms of deciding, okay, this looks perfect on an iPhone 14, but on a tablet, on a tablet size, which is much bigger, 18 inches, or different form factors, you certainly cannot just stretch out the screen, right? It will look terrible. So what we
Mm.
needed to do is, maybe because the form factor is a little bigger, we needed to look at different kind of design And that's where the user research X designer comes into place, right? He helps us design which one is best for different form factors. And then the developer takes that and applied it into the code. So same thing with the smartwatches. As the smartwatch came out, you couldn't take the same mobile app that you have running on your phone and just apply that. For one thing, those little screen that you have here, they are much, much smaller. So there's not a lot of information that you can really fit into them. So that's where the designer comes into place and help us. Okay, this one is very, very specific. We just need to find a way to not only display one screen at a time, but to be able to navigate as you're scrolling, as you need to get to the next page or to get to the next information that you get to. So as far as you're building your mobile apps, it's very critical that you do have enough in your budget, enough of your time to really invest in your design process, because that's really what's going to drive the whole development lifecycle. You cannot just start with the development process. It doesn't work that way. Your development lifecycle starts with the design process. He's the one that understands he can get into the user psyche. He can even do user research to sit down and interview the users and understand exactly the environments that they're going to be using those mobile apps. And once they understand that, what they do is they put several markups designed together. And for the markups, they provide the final, the final screenshots that the developers use to develop to code to. So once you have that, and that's when you have the development process. Even the development process is not final too. As part of the agile process, that is a continuous improvement, right? You put out an MVP, a minimum viable product, because you really wanted to test out whether or not that's going to be acceptable to the market. So by putting out the MVP, it allows you to test it and see it, understand how the users interacting with it, whether or not they like it, or if you need to tweak it, or if you need to add to it, or if you need to relieve or remove certain things, or if it's completely bombed out, right? You're not going to know until you put out an MVP. And then the next iteration, you can improve onto that. And then, but all of that is information that's captured through the to the designer. You capture it. They put out, your markups, your UI design, and the developers apply that. And then you put it out, you put the next version out into the market again and see how it contributes to it. So that's the continuous improvement, continuous process in terms of finding out exactly how your apps is doing out into the marketplace.
Yeah, you brought up another important point where different verticals of the same organization to work more cohesively than ever before. Because one, if you talk about the infrastructure, it used to be like laptop, desktop, and whatever that before. Now the smartphones, and if you think about the field staff, they have whole different set of hardware devices that they use. Maybe the guns they scan, or maybe the wearable devices that they were using. So the business is much more involved, and the designs are evolving based on the business changing demands, even though if it is, previously also it was there, but I feel like, now business is a lot more involved in the design, because every time we are designing something on a smartwatches or even wearable device applications, we need to cleanse the applications which are already existing. What's your take on that?
So that's a great point, and I think that's that part of it that's really undervalued or sometimes overlooked until maybe too late in the process, right? So, just to give you an example, I think a lot of times business focus primarily on the websites because that's what was driving their business for a long time, right? Is whatever what was being access to the portal, but so they considered the user base was really based on the number of users that was accessing these portals. But guess what happened? A lot more, the customer base has actually changed. So a lot more people are using on their mobile devices than they are now on the portals anymore, on the website. So, I mean, just to give you an example, Delta Airlines is actually one good example. So maybe 6 years ago, the main driver for Delta Airlines was, buying your tickets online. And then in the last 4 or 5 years, that actually switched to now the number one driver for purchasing your tickets or your airline tickets is actually on the website, on the native app. So that was something a lot of business sometimes overlooked. They think that, okay, they design the infrastructure to really handle the number of users that is coming from um, the website. And then as you slowly start to see the rise of shift, I guess, as you see the shift from mobile websites to native app, what's going to happen is that the user base sometimes double or even triple, and the infrastructure cannot handle that. So you really have to kind of rethink the way you design, you architect your infrastructure, so that way you can handle both your portal as well as your mobile devices. And then as the shift is completed to where most of your user base are coming from your mobile devices, you need to rethink the way you injecting that data to the mobile websites. So I'm talking about, to where if you on a web page, you using more likely a Wi-Fi or fast Wi-Fi, or even a wired or connected or wired connection, which is your Ethernet port, right? Or if you're one of the lucky ones, you can have fiber to your house, you can use that. So it's very fast in terms of the way that information is downloaded into your website. But on your mobile device, yes, if you're using your home Wi-Fi, it looks fast, but on the road, you don't always have the luxury of using 5G, right? 5G is still a myth in a lot of places. I think a lot of places still using 3Gs or even 4G. So can you imagine trying to download one web page that basically kind of injects all that data into one time onto your mobile app? So it makes for a crappy user experience to where what you're seeing is a spinning wheel on your mobile app, because it's waiting for all the data to be downloaded, for that information to be presented to the user. So what we've come up with is a way to rethink or re-architect the infrastructure to where what we're doing is basically kind of injecting small pieces of data at a time. So that way it allows your native app to be presented to you while it's downloading the rest information, the information in the background. So and then that's where the microservices comes into play, or even providing multiple kind of different architecture, to kind of really provide you to basically kind of the way you think about your API designs and the way that information is being accessed to your backend. All of that is very important to where you need to re-architect that information, so that way the user experience is much more noticeable, is much more enjoyable when they're doing that on a very low bandwidth on the mobile devices. So it's very, very important piece of the process is your backend design as well as the infrastructure design.
So you brought up my next question. Actually, your answers have my next questions.
Okay, I'm a step ahead of you.
So, it's a design thinking. We always talk about design thinking, but we do not implement design thinking. The classic example that you said, like, for example, Delta app or any app, for example, like if I take Delta app as an example, so I should be able to book my ticket. I should be able to track where, my next flight, or I should be able to track where my luggage is. And this is actually adding additional load on the same record, one record. So what are your suggestions for different applications to interact together, given the constraints, like, why 5G, when you are on international travel, connection to a simple Wi-Fi itself is a difficult thing, and travel has got its own lovely challenges that we know.
Right,
And
right.
then memory comes a question, and then how much data we retain, how do we purge? So how should anybody should think about these kinds of challenges, which are extremely practical. At the same time, we cannot change the user experience. The UI should be the same, but the user wants more and more on the same app.
Yeah, so the design thinking is a very, very important piece of the process. Also, I talked earlier about the UI design, the designers, right, are being involved in the process. So it so happened a lot of designers, most of the designers actually, that I know actually use the design thinking as part of the process. And the design thinking really, if you think about it, it's actually started out by Apple a few years ago. That's a process that's been adopted by pretty much every company, including Google, IBMs of the world, and everybody else, right? And the reason for that is that you're not just rushing into designing an idea, right? By designing, I mean developing an idea. You have to sit down and to, okay, what is it that you're trying to solve? And how are you going to solve it? And what is going to be the user experience as part of that solution? So, and that's where the design thinking come into place to help you answer all those questions. And along each step, you'll find out that some things may work, some things may not work, because you really kind of by this. The design thinking too, I mean, it's sometimes I think it sounds very hard, but it's really very simple. All you're doing is basically you gather a group of experts from different fields. It shouldn't be everybody from the same team. It should be, the UX designer, somebody from the business, somebody who's going to be using the app, your architect, your engineers, your backend developer, your API developer. They should all be a part of that, because as you building that process, the API developer says, well, if we're going to do this, then we need to think about this too. And then same thing from the database guy. He's going to tell you, well, if you're changing the way you're accessing that data, we need to change the way we design the database itself, right? So all of that is really kind of start tying in together, and it makes the whole process much, much smoother. So it allows you to kind of anticipate those problems and be able to answer them. I'm not to say he's going to answer all the problems beforehand, but I would say most of them, you can anticipate them and start finding some ways to kind of really to mitigate those problems. So that's what the design process allows you to do. You really bring in multiple experts in different background, different expertise to help you go through all those different pain points that are coming up, and then finding ideas in terms of how to develop it. And that's actually a very good way to kind of develop your roadmap as well, because as you're looking at, okay, what is your MVP? Because obviously, there's so many things. You cannot just build for 1 year and not be releasing anything after 1 year, right? You have to look at maybe small achievable goals. So those things may be 2 to 3 months, whatever your goals is. Find out exactly something that you think the user is going to be very experienced, that's going to basically hook them into your idea, and then continue to build on that. And that's what every big company is doing, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or Google or Apple, they all doing the same process. But all of it is driven through the design process to help put together a really long roadmap in terms of what they think the users may want. And then based on the roadmap, they start looking at, okay, which one is the short-term achievable goals, which one can be pushed out into the long-term, medium term, and which one can be pushed out into the longer-term solution. So all of that is really part of the design, a design thinking process that it helps you understand exactly what your roadmap is going to look like.
Yeah, that's a very good tip, incorporating the concepts of design thinking and having design workshops, and also having upfront product roadmap. So here is another challenge, right? When we are thinking, when we are doing something, and the cost is something that we really have to keep in mind. And that's, we have like,
That's
oh,
now.
it's like one prototype, it fits all, but we know not one size fits all. Even though we are developing one code base, there are existing frameworks that actually allow us to deploy in multiple different devices and maintain. But how are we managing, or what are your tips on how do we track and manage the budgets in a given situation where we have multiple versions of the implementation happens?
Yeah, I think that's always a constant challenge, right? I think
Mhm.
that, and then that's where we come in as a leadership, to help manage that, right? To where your engineer is very driven and just, oh, cool, that's a good idea, and they certainly like to get in the nitty gritty technical aspect of it, but I mean, by we meaning the leadership team, can come in and start reining them in and says, okay, a little bit of reality check here. I mean, this is our budget for this year. This is how many people we can put, for the size of the team. Let's see what is achievable within that time frame, and within that concept too. I mean, once you have an idea, through the design thinking process, what is achievable, I think, you'll find that, the budget manager can come in and kind of start knocking things down. I mean, it's a real terrible job, but somebody has to do it, right? I mean, you do have to kind of look what's achievable, what's not achievable. And a lot of times too, I think it is still achievable within the framework of agile development process. Instead of taking, 2 sprints, it's just gonna take 4 sprints, as an example. So I think that's a different way. It kind of introduces you, it forces you to think of it a different way, but it's still achievable. So I think that is very important, though, that we do have to keep in mind that there is a budget that we have to keep as part of the process, and
Mhm.
that's where the final piece can come in and help us achieve that.
Yeah, the icing on the cake, is the cloud technologies thrown at us. So how do we deal with all the native applications migrating into cloud? Cloud, it has got its pros and cons, and how does this imply to the mobile application maintenance and
Well,
management?
I guess as a jumping point from budget, you have to look at what's achievable in the short term versus
Yeah.
long term, right? As you're starting out, I mean, having been an entrepreneur myself, I mean, I was able to shop around to find a very low cost kind of cloud solutions, right? So there are those out there outside of Google, outside of Microsoft, right? So there are those vendors out there that you can achieve. That just means that you have to build your database, you have to build your own environment, but I think that is still achievable. But what you'll find out, though, as you're growing your user base, you also have to grow your solutions along with that, right? Because
Mhm.
what you started out as a startup, a solution, is not gonna handle. I mean, maybe it can handle maybe a couple 100,000 users, but beyond that, you have to look at, okay, I need to look at a better solution, bigger solution in terms of to handle more users, right? I mean, if you look at Netflix as an example, they started out with a lot of outages at the beginning because they just couldn't handle the load. I think now they basically have it figured out to where they can handle all those countries around the world, right? Streaming multiple, how many, I mean, within my household alone, I think I have like 5 different users at the same time on Netflix. I don't think that's something that was achievable a few years ago, but now I think Netflix is able to handle that load. So as an example, I mean, I think you have to look at it that way too. You need to be able to grow your infrastructure and to handle that load, because certainly you need to be able to basically continue to service to service your users. And a lot of that too is looking at not only in terms of how many streaming that you have to serve out, but what if there's an outage? What is your your backup strategy? Are you gonna be able to route that traffic very quickly? And I think that's where a lot of people are looking at some of the bigger cloud solutions like Microsoft or the Google Cloud or even Amazon, AWS, to handle some of that. AWS, I think, is actually one of the best right now because everybody's on there because they're able to handle those outages very quickly, as opposed to some of the other parties out there. But I think Microsoft is catching out, and so is the Google. But AWS is still top in the world in terms of how they are able to handle all those load as well as to handle backup scenario, outage scenarios, all those type of things. So all those things you have to consider as part of your overall solutions, because you do have to make sure that as you're providing that service, allow your customers become your critical part of your solution, right? They rely on you to provide a critical service. So if you continue to have outage after outage, well, guess what? They're just gonna drop you and go to the competition. So do you want that, or do you want the bad reviews on your company? Also, all those things certainly you have to consider. So it's a lot easier to kind of make sure you have a very good backup strategy than having to explain all the time why your network is down or why your service is down. So
yeah, you brought a very important point from the application maintenance point of view, going to a better cloud hosting solutions where DR and backups are, done in much more reliable manner.
yeah.
That's a good tip for everyone. One last question: if somebody is doing a startup, how do they market and monetize? Tips on that, because you played both roles.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people get discouraged when they have an idea, they don't know exactly how they can start their own company, and really kind of be able to get to the market. So there are lots of tools available right now that allow you to do that on your own. And I mean by on your own, I mean that because you don't want to sell everything that you have before you even get started, because that's a bad strategy. What you end up, if your company is successful, you're gonna end up with nothing because you already sold everything to somebody else, right? Do you actually want that? If you look at what's his name from Facebook, he's able to retain a good portion of his company because he was very smart in the way he sold that idea to investors, right? So and one of the things that he did, though, he started very small, and he started out on campus at the university where he was. He started very small, which was an initial group of friends, and then that grew into group friends of friends and then eventually grew to the whole campus, right? And then once he had a very good customer base from the campus, he decided that he was going to expand on it. And really, that should be the strategy for your business as well. You start out small and see how it expands. Once you expand slowly and slowly, and before you get too far ahead of yourself. One of the ways you can do that to help you get there is actually, there's Google metrics. Google Analytics provides you with lots of tools that you can start tracking how many users are accessing your information. Information is gold in that market. That's the only way you can tell whether or not your business is succeeding or failing, is by using metrics. So you have to track everything that you're doing. And even if your idea is failing, it can actually, if you looking at the metric itself, you can find out there's one portion of that original idea that may be a great idea. So remove everything else and focus on that piece that you see the users are most interested in, and that itself can turn it into a success. So there's lots of companies that have achieved that. But in order to determine that, you need to have the metrics. So there's Google Metrics is a good portion. I think they're free to get started. But keep in mind though, as you start growing your data, Google will actually, have access to that data. So you may want to think about switching platforms as you grow bigger, right? Because Google does see all that information, that all your customers' information. And because your customer information is your proprietary information, right? You certainly don't want a company like Google to have free access to that. You certainly should think about, making sure you protect it and then take it and move it to a different platform. So that's the one thing. There's other tools out there. I would say if you know coding yourself, start coding, but also start learning about the design process as well. So there are some tools out there to help you do mockups, UI mockups. There's some. I know Adobe has a free period that you can try some of their design tools. If you cannot afford it, they have multiple levels to where you can start with one portion is a startup kit, and then the other one is much more expensive. This is what the professional version. So they have different levels that you can apply to. So each one unlocks different level, different feature along the way. So, but if you cannot afford, if you don't know, if you don't have a friend who's an artist, I would say learn the process yourself. Try to do the design yourself, and try to replicate that. And you yourself, you become the CEO, the marketer, the salesperson, the developer, the QA. I mean, all of that, you have to be able to wear all those hats all in one. That's the only way you can succeed, because your funds is limited. You have to see what you can do. If you don't know how to sell, go out and sell it. If you an introvert, I can tell you, you need to learn to be an extrovert to sell. I was in that scenario myself as an introvert. I had to learn very quickly that I needed to sell the product. So you become an extrovert very quickly. And you also have to become a project manager. As you have people reporting to you, you have to, even if you outsource that information, hire a friend or hire a team, whatever, offshore, you have to basically project manage that, because you have to make sure they're sticking to some goals, to some timelines, and making sure they're delivering. So all those things, you don't need fancy tools for this. All you need is, PowerPoint or Excel spreadsheet. So all those tools are available, from Microsoft Office. Yeah, you don't need those fancy tools. You don't need a backlog, one of those agile tools out there. I mean, just use Excel spreadsheet, manage that, all that. You only need one of those fancy tools only when you become very big, when you have multiple product, multiple features. But at the beginning, start out small. Don't buy too much. You can don't buy too much, or don't invest too much into the tools, because you can really you're gonna need it for the marketing aspect of it. And then the marketing aspect of it is another scenario to where you do have to find a platform that you think that you need to reach out a bigger audience. So it's whether it's investing into an ad on Google or Facebook or Instagram. You do have to invest into that, because you do have to find to make people aware of the product. You cannot just rely on word of mouth. Word of mouth is great, but it can only carry you so far. But I would say at the beginning, start with a smaller group first. Work your smaller group. You do the legwork. Make sure that everybody starts knowing about your platform. And as it's growing and growing, that's when the marketing aspect of it comes into place, to where you can start looking at doing advertising into those other platforms. Or that's really a good investment too, because when there's multiple products into that same space, you're gonna realize that your product get drowned out. A perfect example, if you go on the Apple App Store, if you search for even maps, let's use maps as an example. If you look for maps, there's multiple vendors of maps right now around the world, and not just the Google map, not just Apple Maps. I mean, there's multiple ones out there. So you do need to see how you can differentiate yourself. So Google App Store, even though it's free, it shouldn't be the only way that you rely on people to find your product. You have to find a way to do some marketing, some advertising, whether you go into the local store and, and telling, and go to the fair, go to a festival and say, oh, look, there's this app I built. Are you interested? Try it out. And then just build some, business cards and say, here, try this, or with a QR code, just QR code this, and then that will take you to the link directly to the App Store to download the app. That's a very good way to advertise that. And that one itself doesn't take much. It's just, you go to the printer, print out those little business size cards and pass them out all over the place at the festival or at the party or at the, the concert. That's a very good way to kind of put yourself out there if you don't have the money to invest yet onto the Facebook platform or Instagram platforms or wherever else. So there's simple steps that you can take to get there.
Lovely tips. I'm sure whoever is going to listen to this conversation will definitely rush to get their QR codes for sure. One last question before we wind up. Supply demand, it continuously exists. What do you advise to somebody who is aspiring to become or who are already in this field but needed to polish their skills to suit the future trends?
As a developer or as a logistic expert?
As a developer, let's say.
Okay, well, I can tell you that's an in-demand person right now. That's definitely an engineer that's in demand, not just by Amazon. I can tell you by Walmart, by Albertsons, by everybody, because one way or another, I mean, they're selling their product, right? When you think about e-commerce is they're selling their product on the website, but selling it is one thing. You have to find ways of that product to be shipped to the final destination, right? That's when that logistic expert can come into play. Even building the website, you have to connect the dots between what's available in your inventory versus what's been shown on the website itself, right? Because you don't want to be selling a non-existent product, right? A product that you no longer have in stock. So as the engineer, the developer need to correlate that information between what's in the database versus what's being presented on the platforms. So all of that is actually in demand right now. So if you don't want to be a developer, I would say definitely be a logistics designer. That's where the demand is right now, because one thing COVID has shown is that e-commerce is very, very important, and it's here to stay. It is not going back to pre-COVID scenario anymore. It is definitely here to stay. So yeah, definitely brush up your skill set in logistics.
I'm sure, there is a lot to take for each one of the team member, regardless of what role they play. If they are associated directly or indirectly with mobile development, there's a lot to learn from this conversation. And I have seen you in action at Delta building amazing applications, and I am sure you're building amazing applications in your current assignment, Ecom Lab. So wishing you and your team a wonderful success, and thank you, Gregory, for all the insights. And we'll see you again.
It's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for your time, and good luck, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.